In this video, we're going to show you how to get to this point, and we're going to take a lot of steps in the process of getting here, but essentially how you can create an app for doing the entire intake process, where you would save or cancel and do the intake this way, or you could view all existing intakes by going here. So this is going to be one option, and this is going to be the final option that I cover in here. We're also going to explain how you can use Power Automate to send an email with a link to a view-only version of the intake. So we're going to cover a lot of different approaches. It'll be about 3 different options in total as we walk through different options for how you can set this up inside of a SharePoint page. How do you view a form or edit a form after you've submitted it? So this is going to be kind of a follow-on to this video here, where we basically walk through how to create this form and then bypass looking at the SharePoint list entirely from the user perspective. So they essentially can create a form, submit the form, and it'll take them right back to whatever page you tell them to go back to. Often it's the main page, or it could be a SharePoint page dedicated towards whatever you're trying to do. Again, this request process is usable for a variety of different things. Maybe it's a COM support request or support for some sort of a survey. You can put pretty much any kind of a process in this. Now, there are some interesting potential issues you have to work through as far as allowing the user to view the status of the request and kind of to view the previous request or even edit that request. That's what we're going to cover in today's video, specifically how to use the links to control some of that process and what are some of the limitations you might run into. All right, let's go back to our homepage so we can see kind of how this works. Now on our homepage, we've got this button, and we created this last time. I actually used a button last time. I switched over to quick links. That way we can have an icon on here, and then we'll have a place to put the next button that we're going to create today. But if we click this button, we can kind of see this in action. And essentially, you can create a new request. And if I cancel this request, it's going to take us back to that page. That's the functionality that we're looking for. The user doesn't see the SharePoint list, doesn't interact with it at all. But what if they want to view the request they put in there? How would we handle that? Now, this is the link that we created, and this is essentially the steps that we went through. This is essentially what the link was from the form initially. And then this is the page that we wanted to take them back to. And then we put it together here. And again, we just kind of changed a little bit here with this additional information where we swap things out here. If we go up here, we can see that there's a little bit of a difference between what it originally was and what we did. And essentially, this is how you can control a lot of the functionality with this particular approach. So now we've got NewForm. Right? So what if we don't want them to create a new form? In this case, we're trying to get it so that they can open up a form, maybe view something they've previously created. So let's go ahead and copy this. That way we don't change that one. And now we're going to talk about how do you do edits? What would you do differently in order to make this work for editing something? Well, what we have to do is change from new, because we don't want to create something, and just change that to edit. And it really is just that simple, but we have to tell it what do we want to edit. So right here, we're going to say ID equals, and we'll just pick a random one right now, 12, and then and. So what this should do is we're going to edit ID number 12. So whatever record is number 12, that's essentially what we're going to edit when we use this link. So let's go ahead and copy this and go back to our portal. Now on our portal, let's go ahead and edit our page here, and we're just going to add another link. So let's go ahead and add a link, and we'll do say from a link here, and we're going to paste that in. So we've got ID number 12, hit add, and then we've got our edit form. Now let's go ahead and just change this, and we won't worry about the image for right now. Let's go ahead and close this up and republish, and let's test this out. So we can click this button, we should see ID number 12. So if we go back and look at this, we should say Employee Engagement App, Chief Safety Officer Xander Mill is ID number 12. Let's go back to our SharePoint list and confirm that. All right, so on our SharePoint list, let's go ahead and modify this view so we have the ID column in here. So we'll add that in, and then we'll hit OK. And that'll be at the very end. So let's go over here and find number 12. All right, so here is number 12. Let's scroll over. And we've got Xander Mill Employee Engagement App. So it worked exactly the way that we wanted it to. But what is the problem here? On this approach, we basically hard-coded that in there, so everybody that clicks this button is going to see ID number 12. So as you can see, you might be seeing the issue here. How do we know what number to make them see? And actually, this is a problem with how this is set up, is it might not work for your use case to use this kind of an approach. But let's explain this link modification one more time, just so you know kind of what the possibilities are for using this link. Now, this is how you would create the edit version, just like we said. If we go here and now we want to do a view version, let's go ahead and explain that. Again, I don't know that this is going to work for most situations because, again, how do you know what the number is? That's kind of a problem with this kind of an approach, right? So let's go ahead and we're now editing. Now what we want to do is view. So all we have to do is type in display. And I don't know why they went with display versus view, because it would have made a lot more sense. You get new, you get edit, you want to view, and you say disp. Okay, I don't completely understand the logic for that, but it is what it is. So that's the proper syntax here. But again, you've got this problem of ID equals 12 or ID equals 1 or whatever the person submitted. So it turns out there really isn't a good approach for handling this using this link approach. It works great for bypassing the SharePoint list and bringing them back here. If you actually want to use a link like this, where they can open up that form and see what they've done, you have to use Power Automate. So we're going to explain how to set this up using Power Automate. And again, it will be the exact same approach. The question is do you want the person to be able to edit it, or do you want the person to be able to view it? Let's go ahead and demonstrate those quick here though. So now that we've created this link, let's go back to our SharePoint portal and put that in. All right, let's again go ahead and edit our page. And then we're going to go ahead and add a button here, and it'll be from a link. And let's go paste this one in there and hit add. And this one will just say new form and republish. All right, so let's click this. Again, we should see ID number 12, so Xander Mills again. And I can't edit it. I no longer have the ability to edit. I can go up here and edit this. And this is a good thing to be aware of, is that you do need to do a little bit more setup here if you want to use a link approach like this. And essentially what we're going to do with Power Automate is send the link to the person when they submit the new item. That way they've got the link and they can navigate back to view or edit depending on what you want them to do. If you don't want them to be able to edit at all, then we do need to make a couple changes. Let's go ahead and hit the back button here. Let's refresh. Now, what do we need to do to make it so they can only view it? If we wanted to say, hey, you can add it, but you can only view it after it's been added. All the edits and anything else will happen by the project managers or the team that handles this process. What we need to do is come up here to our settings option here, and we need to go to our site permissions. And then from here, we're going to go to our advanced permission settings. And let's look at our permission levels. Now these are the out-of-the-box permission levels. So we can see we've got edit, contribute, and read. And if we look at these, we can say, well, this looks pretty good, except for we need them to be able to add. So we go to contribute, and as soon as we get to contribute, we've got the ability to add, view, but we can also delete and do updates. And same thing as we move up as permissions increase, you get more and more capability. So what we need to do is add a permission level. Or you could modify one of these existing ones if you need to. And we'll just call it project request intake. That way it's specific to this. It could be used for other things and then maybe we change the name of it, but for this it's pretty good. And what do we want them to be able to do? View items, open items. You might not want them to view versions. I'm going to kind of emulate what is available in the read option and give them a little bit more, but not as much as the contribute. So in the read, you can actually view versions. You can't delete versions. You can go ahead and create alerts, and you can go ahead and view the application pages. And then if we come down here to site permissions, We definitely want them to be able to view the pages. We probably also want them to be able to browse user information. And then typically for the read, you would still have this, but it is deprecated, so it's probably less important. Again, I'm trying to use a lot of the same stuff from the read. If you don't give them the right stuff, they won't be able to fully use the portal the way that it was designed to be used. So you want to make sure you give them enough permissions without giving them too much. And then we'll go ahead and use this one also. And then we also want them to be able to add items. So that's essentially what we're adding beyond what read only gives them, is the ability to actually add items. And let's go ahead and put a description in here. All right, that looks good. Allow users to add and view items. Deletion or edits will be handled by the portal management team. That looks good to me. So let's go ahead and go down here and hit the create button here. And now we've got this one created. Now, just kind of a caveat, you might want to consider editing your permissions here for edit. By default, when you add somebody to your portal, you get the email as an owner and it says, hey, do you want to give them permission? They get edit. And with edit, they can actually delete pages and lists, and you might not want every single person that you automatically grant access to your portal to have that. So something to consider is you might want to adjust how this works. If that's something you're interested in a future video, let me know in the comments, because I can explain how to set this up also. I've had people automatically approve everybody and their SharePoint pages were actually being deleted by users. Now, fortunately, there's a recycle bin, so you can restore that, but you might just want to limit people's ability by default to do that kind of stuff. So just a little quick caveat on doing that. All right, let's go ahead and go back to permissions, and let's go ahead and create a group. Now, this is going to be project request intake, and we're going to assign the permissions that we just created right here, and we'll hit create. Now, for this group, you would add essentially everybody that could potentially need to be able to create a request. That'll give them the permissions to be able to create and view, but not edit or delete the request that they put in there. Again, you can kind of customize what you want them to be able to do. This is if you wanted to just give them view only and that's it, how you would handle that. All right, let's go back to our main portal. Now, unfortunately, I can't demonstrate that for you. I'm a one-person show here and I don't have any other users. And this is probably a good time to talk about tips. So in the description of all my videos, I've got the ability to submit a tip. Right now, my channel is not monetized. If you want me to do some of these other things, right now, the channel is kind of in the negative. It doesn't really make any money because it's not doing any monetization. And to be honest with you, YouTube doesn't really pay a lot anyway. So most of your YouTube content creators rely a lot on sponsorships and other sources of revenue because, again, YouTube really doesn't pay a lot unless you've got like millions of subscribers. And even then, a lot of times they're getting lots of sponsorships for their videos. Not as likely in content like this. So a great source of funding these channels is actually any donations from people. But there is an option in the description of the video if you found this content helpful to go ahead and submit a tip. I much appreciate that, and it will help me do other things. For example, log in as another user and show how some of this stuff actually is working. I can't currently do that because, again, that's another license, and I'm trying to focus the licenses on specific content that I think will be helpful. Adding another user is not necessarily super helpful, but it could be helpful for demonstration purposes. All right, let's move on to the rest of the video here. The next thing to do is we need to create a Power Automate to send those links to the person. That's the best way to handle letting the user see what's going on with their request or see their actual request. There's another option we're going to cover later in this video where we are going to give them the ability to see inside of this portal using a completely different approach. But first, let's talk about how do we get the link to the person. So if we just wanted to show them that, this is a very common approach that a lot of places use. They send you a link and that's the only way you can access the item that you submitted is through that link. All right, let's go ahead back to our SharePoint list so we can create a Power Automate. Now in here, all we have to do is come up to this integrate option here and go to Power Automate, and we're gonna go ahead and create a flow. Now in this case, we're just gonna say see your flows and create a new flow from here. And I always skip this anyway. Now, if you don't like the new designer, I'm not a huge fan of it. There are things I like about the new designer, but I find the old one to have a better setup here. This one, everything's over here on the left-hand side. The old version, it was kind of all in the middle. Both work great. This does give you a little bit more flexibility, and I really like how this displays, because you can see the flow a little bit easier in the new. But I do find that working with this side panel is a little bit more difficult than using the classic approach. So a lot of times I do default to the classic approach. All right, so let's go ahead and use SharePoint as our trigger. When an item is created, and we'll go ahead and select our site, and then we'll select our SharePoint list. And then we'll go ahead and create a new step here. And we're gonna go ahead and send an email. So we'll search for send an email, and we're gonna do send an email version 2. Now the 2 is gonna be the created by. So let's go ahead and add dynamic content. And we're gonna say created by email. And then the subject is new project request, intake. And you can put whatever you want in there. And then what we need is the link. And what link do we need to provide? Well, the links that we created is what we need to provide. So let's go back to Notepad and grab our link. And for this one, we're gonna go with the view version here. So let's copy that and then go back to our email. All right, let's go ahead and paste this in there. Now, you might be saying, what about this problem right here? What item are we sending them the information for? Well, fortunately, we now have that information. So all we have to do is add the dynamic content here for the ID number. So we'll put that in right there. Now, what is this going to do? It's the exact same link that we had before. The difference is that we're saying whatever the new item is that's been created, the ID is that. So we've essentially sent them the link. Now you can put whatever you want into this email. Maybe it's click below to view the project request intake. And then we've got the link right there below. And you can also use it as a click here kind of a thing, where if you want to use that, oftentimes you can't add dynamic content in here. I really wish they would allow for dynamic content here, because it would make it a lot easier to create this. So you've got this link here. You could also use the code view here and kind of replicate the URL approach, but lots of flexibility on this. I could do a whole separate video on how to kind of control this and make this look pretty and do all kinds of nice things with this. For this, we're just going to keep things basic though. All right, let's go ahead and name this flow. And for this, we'll go ahead and call it new project request intake view only email and hit save. All right, let's go back to our SharePoint portal and test things out. Let's go ahead and do an intake. And we'll say test email project. And we'll say the sponsor is IT again. And then we'll say the requester is me. And the date submitted is today. All right, let's go ahead and hit the save button on this. And it is done. So now we should see an email in a few seconds. All right, so if we go here, I've got my email. It came to me. It came from me because I created it. Let's go ahead and copy this. We can see we have ID number 19 here. Let's go ahead and copy that. And we'll go ahead and open it up in a new browser. All right. And looks like everything worked. So that's essentially how you can provide a view only link. Again, if I was inside of the permission group that we just created a few seconds ago, I wouldn't have the ability to edit all here because my permissions wouldn't allow for editing the item. But I can go through and I can see everything that I put into this. Everything worked perfectly. Now you can do the exact same thing with the edit link that we created earlier as well. Now, one thing to point out with this approach is you've got this up here. So your more observant users might say, let's click this. And they're gonna end up back on the SharePoint list page. There isn't really a way to fix this with this approach, but you can mitigate it a little bit. Let's say you don't want them to be able to see all of the different requests. You can actually adjust that also. So if we go back up here to list settings, let's click here, and then we'll go to our advanced settings. And we wanna do item level permissions. So essentially, read items that were created by the user is what you would want to turn on to limit what people are going to see. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll hit the OK button here. And then we'll go back to our list. Now, in my case, I created all of these, so it's not necessarily going to change anything. And Actually, I'm an owner, so I would still see everything anyway. So this change isn't going to impact every user on the portal, but in our specific permission that we created, we can adjust it to work with this as well. So now let's go back to our permissions quick and make an adjustment there. So this is the permission that we created. The one thing we want to take away is view application pages. So if we take this away, people in this group are only going to see the items they created in that list. And again, they still can't edit or delete because we removed the permissions for doing that also. Let's go ahead and hit the save button here. And now that that's saved, let's go back to our portal. Now, again, for me, I can't demonstrate this because I don't have another account to log into to kind of demonstrate how this is going to look, but this should limit the ability for them to see other people's requests. And again, we've already limited their ability to edit and do all those things. So essentially, we've made it so that we've almost completely limited the ability to get to the SharePoint list. But what if you want to get rid of it entirely? How would you handle that? Now, the next part of this video is going to cover how you would essentially create a different approach entirely for handling this entire process. And for this approach, let's go ahead and go to the Power App Maker portal. And if you're one of those people that can't remember links and you like to favorite everything, if you're already on a portal, it's actually really easy to get there. All we have to do is go up here and you'll see the Power App Maker portal right here. So let's just click that link. And here we are. All right, so the first thing I always recommend is always have a solution. Put everything inside of a solution. So let's go ahead and do that quick. And we'll just say project request intake for our name of our solution. Then we'll go ahead and select our publisher and hit the create button here. And again, the reason I always start with the solution is there's probably going to be some Power Automates involved with this approach. So we're going to put everything inside of the solution so that it's very obvious which Power Automates belong to this particular application. Now let's go ahead and create an app. So we'll go up here and we'll do a Canvas app. And then we'll call it project request intake and we'll hit the create button. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and adjust our settings here. And for this, let's take a look at our display. Everything looks good there. And we'll go to updates. We want to use modern controls here. So let's go ahead and select that, turn that on, and everything else looks good. So we'll just turn on that one option there. And then let's go ahead and adjust our theme here. And again, I always do this for every app. And the font is Arial. And then we do 7, 12, and 184 and hit the create button. And then we enable this. All right, so now we've got our theme set. And we've got essentially the modern controls turned on so we can use those. Next, let's go ahead and change the name of our page. So we'll call this main screen. Now for screen readers, this is what's actually read. So you do want to actually make the names kind of something that's readable and understandable for screen reader purposes. Now this is going to be the landing page of our very small application for how we handle these intake forms. Let's go ahead and create a new screen. And again, we'll just do a blank page. And this will be our request intake form. Perfect. All right, now we want to add our data source. So let's add data, and this is going to be a SharePoint list. So pick SharePoint here, and then we'll find our portal and our demo and connect. So now we'll have our actual data here that we can select from. And we come back here. Now we've already created our entire intake form. Why don't we just reuse it? So here's everything that we created. Let's go ahead and copy everything. So we'll copy everything over. Now let's go back to our new app and we'll go ahead and paste. All right, so there that is. Now you might say, well, we've got a bunch of errors now, and that's common. We were using the SharePoint integrator before, so we're gonna have to adjust this. Now this one right here is actually for our SharePoint Form 1. Let's just go ahead and delete that. We don't need that for this particular approach. Again, we've got our SharePoint Form 2 that we created right here that we will need. Let's go ahead and edit this. Now this is the image that we added, so we do need to re-add our image. So let's go ahead and find our image and upload. Now this one is our logo, so let's go ahead and select that. And then we need to change our background image here, so let's go ahead and upload that image. And here's our page background, so let's select that. All right, so we're getting a lot closer to what we already pre-built. Let's edit this. Now the item for this form, we're going to change this approach a little bit here. So right now it's the SharePoint integration selected first. We're going to set this in an entirely different way. So for right now, let's just go ahead and delete this. And we want to adjust this. Sometimes when you copy and paste, the settings you had get adjusted out of there. So let's just fix that. Yeah, that looks a little bit better there. Now it looks like we're pretty much where we were when we built this thing. All right, let's go back to our main page here. And for this, we're going to set it again to our page background. We're going to kind of keep the same theme going throughout this entire process. Now we want to have the ability for the user to see what they've created. And in this particular approach, they're going to be able to see everything they created. Now you can adjust the settings and make it so that it works differently, but we're going to make it so they see everything they created. So let's go ahead and go up here to insert, and we're going to want to insert a gallery. And we'll go ahead and select a vertical gallery, and we'll point it towards our list. All right, so there we go. We have essentially our SharePoint list on it. Let's go ahead and resize this a little bit here. Now our list doesn't have an image. We could put the user's image if we wanted to, but we're not going to worry about that for this. So the first thing we want to do is add in a text, because again, these are all the classic controls. So we'll go ahead and add a text control in here. And we want to make it look kind of like this. So the easiest way to do this is to come over here and copy the font weight. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we'll say the weight of this is basically the same way, but we got to change the formatting to match the modern approach. So this will be regular, and then this will be our bold option. Perfect. Now we want to change the text. Yep, actually I'm fine with the text. This item.title. So now we can essentially get rid of both of these. And there we go. So now we've got our title here. And what other metadata that we want to put in here. So this is the title of the project. So we'll just copy this. And then we'll put this over here. And all we have to do is back this up. And we can pick out what other things that we're looking for the individual to be able to see. And maybe we want to do the approval status. And for approval status, remember, this is a choice column. So we want to do value. And again, you don't have to remember that. If you just hit the dot, it'll tell you what the options are. And then you can just kind of select from the options. Now for demonstration purposes, we're going to add another one on here. And this one we're going to say is requester. And we're going to use requester. And for this one, we'll say display name. So we've got the name of the requester in here. And the reason why we're doing requester versus created is I can actually demonstrate this a little bit better for filtering purposes, because I created everything. So if I filter it, I'm going to see everything. So this is a little bit more effective for demonstration purposes. Now we have to do some adjustments to our app here. So let's go into our app, and then we're going to make this a little bit bigger. And we got to go to our on start. So on start, we need to create some variables. Now for our on start, what we want to do is get some user information. So the user that's actually in this tool, we want to get that information. So what we're going to do is start with a with statement. And with statements need our curly brackets. So we'll go ahead and start with, we're basically creating user. And what do we want user to be? And in this case, we want user to be user. So we'll go ahead and close our curly brackets off there. And then we'll go ahead and add a comma for the next step. And we'll hit enter and tab. Now we want to create a whole bunch of things based off of the user field. So let's go ahead and hit set. And then we'll create a GBL user. And for this, we're going to say it's user. And hopefully it doesn't uppercase it, but it did. So we'll hit the undo there. And then we'll create the next variable. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And then we'll hit enter to do the next one. So we'll say set. And this one we're going to do username. So we're creating the variable of GBL username. And for this one, we'll do the coalesce function. So we ahead put this in there, and it'll be the user dot full name down here. And if that's blank, we want blank. So we're going to go ahead and close that function off. Go to the next function, hit enter. In this one, we're going to do user email. And again, we're going to use the collect function again. Oops. User dot and hit the Z email here. And then if it's blank, we're going to close it off. Then we're going to close off the entire function. And then we're going to add another semicolon for our next function so we're ready to go if we want to create more things. But for right now, that's really all that we need. Now, let's go ahead and hit the run on start. Now, how do we know that this actually worked? Well, let's go ahead and add a field to test this. So we'll go insert a text field, and we'll put it someplace where we can see it. And we'll say GBL user name, and it picks up my name. So we know this is now working. Let's go ahead and delete this. And now we've got those variables, we can apply a filter. So let's add a filter here. So we'll say filter. Now, in this case, we want to filter by requester. So we'll pick the requester field by the email. Now, why would you want to do email versus like the name field or something else? How many John Smiths are in your organization? Potentially, you could have the same name over and over and over again. So it's always better to do something that's a little more unique. And email is unique. So we can guarantee that this will filter everything down. And if we make it equal to the email variable that we created, that will effectively filter this down. So we'll close it off. And now we're only seeing the things that I'm the requester for. If I hold my Alt key down here, we can kind of scroll down. This is everything. There isn't anything else that's being shown here. So we've effectively filtered this down to show only things where the requester is the person that's looking at this app. Now, maybe we want to sort this a little bit. So let's try a sort. So we'll put a sort in here, and then we'll put a comma. And maybe we want to go by title. So we'll select by title there. And let's go ascending and close. And there we go. So now we've got it in alphabetical order, making it a little bit easier for the user to find what they're looking for. You could also sort by other things. Maybe instead of title, you want to go by your created date. And there you go. Now it's in by date order. Now it might be more helpful to the user if you added a column on here for the date. So let's go ahead and put that on here also. And let's go by created. And there you go. Now you've got it in the order. So we can see that this is 8:37. I did this one basically the same time. And then we got the 8:37, 9:31, 9:52, 9:34. So we can see kind of the progression. The reason why these are all the same time is from copy and paste. I did do copy and paste to get a lot of the basic data in there. So you could do a couple different options for your filter. So you can kind of change this up to be however you want to do it. Let's go ahead and organize this a little bit better. So we'll put the date on here, and then we'll change this so that it doesn't overlap. Now this doesn't actually have to be that big, so let's make it a little bit smaller here. And I'll move this over here so it's lined up a little bit. And I think I changed the height on accident, so let's keep everything the same. Now what you might want to do here is change the auto height. So if you've got a longer title, it's going to increase the size of this to kind of match that. That's always a nice feature to add because you might have some pretty long titles on here. So that's probably something to consider. Now we don't need this much space, so let's go ahead and adjust that to 60 is probably good enough. So we'll go with the 60 here. That's a little bit more readable. And let's shrink this down a little bit. Now, what else might we want to do on this page? We might want to make it look like our request intake screen, right? So we've used these containers. We might want to do something kind of similar there. And actually, I'm going to copy this entire container here and move that over here. There we go. Now we're going to change the title of this. All right, let's go ahead and change this to project requests. So that's more inclusive for everything that's being shown here. And what else might we want to do? We might want to put this inside of a container also. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and insert a container, and we'll do a vertical container here. It doesn't really matter, but we're going to add some other functions on here in a second. Now we're going to call this the project request container. And then we'll cut this and select this, make it a little bit bigger first so we don't have any weird pasting issues, and paste it in there. And unfortunately, that happens quite a bit too, so you do have to adjust these after you've put them in there. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll move these in the proper order here so they're not overlapping each other. And we'll move this one over also. We don't really need this to be that big, so let's go ahead and change that to maybe 150. And we'll put this here. Again, this column probably isn't necessary. You could probably remove that. They're only going to see the stuff that you show them anyway, so why they would need to see their name, it's more for the purposes of just kind of doing this demo video that we've got that in there. But let's go ahead and change this to 150 is probably good for this also. And then we'll put the date on here as well. And you might want to have a whole bunch of other information that you're displaying to the user, but for our purposes, that's sufficient. Now we want to move this over also. So we'll put that over here, and we are going to use this. I'm going to change the color. I don't particularly like that. So let's go with this, a little bit darker. And if we select the gallery and we look at the on select, we can see that's false right now. You could also change that. And you could also, just like we did over here, where we've got this selection color here, you could do the same thing if you wanted to. Again, watch the full video on how we created this if you want to institute some of that. But for our purposes, I don't think we really need to worry about that right now. I do want to rename this gallery. So we're going to say gallery project requests. And this is all kind of the cleanup, if you will. I typically go with trying to clean this stuff up here. And for this, we'll go with text created date and text requester name, and we'll do text approval status, and then we'll do text title. All right, so we've got all that in there, and this is going to be our icon select request item. Now, since we've got this selected, let's make some adjustments here. I can't stand the solid, so we're going to get rid of that and make that none. And then let's go over to self.tooltip. Let's go with select request item. And let's go ahead and copy this, and we'll replace the tooltip with the same. So essentially, this is what's going to be read through an accessibility reader, and this is what they're going to see if they hover over the item here. Just kind of keeping everything cleaned up on this. What else might we want to do? Let's adjust our container. So let's go back to our container here, and we went with extra bold over on the other page. And let's go ahead and move this down a little bit, and then we'll center it on our page. That looks about right. And then one thing you might be asking is, what about the labels for the different controls we've got in here? Like, how do we know what all the different columns are? Well, great point. So let's go ahead and add something to our container. And that's actually why we went with a vertical container. This time we're going to go with a horizontal container. And let's go ahead and move that above our gallery. And let's go ahead and change the height for this one to 32 is probably a good start. And let's turn their height off. There we go. And let's go ahead and add a text column here. And let's go ahead and set the width for this to the same as this. So this width is 239. So we're going to set this one to 239 also. Then we'll change our title to project request. That way it aligns with our other page that we created. And let's go ahead and make this bold. And let's increase the font size a little bit. So we'll go to 18 font. That looks pretty good there. And let's go ahead and copy this. Now this one, we set the width to 150. So we'll set this one to 150 also. And then we'll put in the approval status. That looks good. Copy and paste. And this will be our requester. And we'll copy this again. And this would be the date requested. There we go. So now we've got a little bit better organization and setup for this. Now, if we select this container, we're going to go ahead and rename this to the project request header. And then we'll do the same thing with all these. And this time we'll call them labels, project request. And this one will be a label approval status. And this one will go with label requester. And then we've got our label date requested. All right, there we go. So we've got everything kind of set up here the way that we want it. Maybe we want to adjust the overall container a little bit so we take up less empty space in the middle there. And I think that's pretty close. Let's see, we'll move this up a little bit more. Again, you can kind of fine tune this to have roughly what I'm trying to do is about the same amount of space here as I have on the bottom of the page. Now, I might be wondering, what about this line right there? Yeah, I don't like that either. So let's get rid of the extra bold or the light on that. So let's get rid of this and say none. Now, if we play the app, let's see what this looks like. Maybe we want to have a line here to separate things. So let's go ahead and change this. So we'll go ahead and select our container. So let's go ahead and insert a rectangle. You might be saying, what are you doing with a rectangle? Well, rectangles, oddly enough, make great lines. So let's go ahead and change the color of this. And we'll go, let's just delete that. We'll go with RGBA 0, 0, 0, and 0. And then we'll have the ability to actually change just at that point to black. And then we can set this to, I don't know, maybe 2 for that. So what we want to do is move this above the gallery and between our header here. So let's go ahead and move that right there. And now we've got it between, but we need to change our height. Let's change our height to 2. And then let's go ahead and change our width. And for this one, we'll just do parent.width and perfect line. Now, if you use the line is kind of strange where the width of the line adjusts also, and I'm not sure that they've fixed it. I haven't used it in so long because I've been using this approach for so long. But if we hit the Alt, we can kind of see what that looks like. Maybe that's a little thick, so let's go with 1. And then maybe we'll go here with a 1 also. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So let's hit the play button so we can see that. I think that looks pretty good. And again, you could kind of fine tune this. If you change the height of the container here, this will get a little bit less of a gap. And let's just try that and see what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and adjust this one. And instead of 32, let's try 22. And there we go. So let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe a little bit higher. Maybe we need to do like 25. So we'll just kind of fine tune this a little bit. And 25. All right, that's good enough. So now we've got this created. How do we now navigate the user to the project request they've created? Well, let's select this. This is going to be our way of navigating. So we'll go ahead and hit the on select here. And what we want to do is set a variable. And we're going to say selected request, this item. And then just, that's all we need to do. Now, it is good to be aware of that when you select something from a gallery, it is a little bit different of an item than if you're actually working directly with the SharePoint list item or a Dataverse table item. Sometimes there's some benefit in doing a lookup to actually find the full record versus using a gallery selection. So just be aware that if you run into any kind of a strange issue with not being able to use these variables when you create them, try using a lookup, and that sometimes will fix the problem. All right, let's go ahead and hit the next here. And the next thing we want to do is navigate. So we want to go to our request intake form. And I always like to put a screen transition on here. So we'll go ahead and go with cover right, close this off, and then close out the function here. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, what happens when we hit the button here? So if I hit my Alt key so I can test this out, we'll go ahead and click this, and here we are. But it's not showing anything. Well, the variable that we created needs to go in that item property that we deleted out of there earlier. So GBL, selected request, and there we go. Now we can see the full request that was created. All the different items, everything in here. Now you might be saying, yeah, but they can edit it. You're right, they can. So we need to adjust that also. And there's a couple different ways to do that. Now, if we know that we never want them to be able to edit it, it's very simple. All we have to do is select the form here, and then we go over our display, and instead of edit, we're gonna say view. And now all they can do is view. Let's go back to our basic information here. So this is our cloud migration. Now, how do we confirm that this is working? Let's go back to our main screen. We selected cloud migration. Now let's try the remote work toolkit. So let's select this one. And now we're seeing the remote toolkit. And again, I can't edit anything. So this is working exactly as we would expect. All of our navigation still works the same way. So everything's working exactly as intended, but there's still something else we have to do. How do we get the user to go back to the page that they selected from? Well, we need to make some modifications. You have a couple different options. You could put a button up here if you wanted to, or you could put a button right here that allows them to it, or you could put a button over here. You've got actually quite a few options that you could use for this process. If screen real estate is really important, a lot of times you'll put the buttons up on the top bar here. If the screen real estate isn't super important, then you'll put it here. In this particular design, screen real estate is not super compressed, so let's go ahead and just put the button inside of this container. So inside the main container, let's go ahead and insert, and then we'll find a container. And again, we want the buttons to go left and right, so let's go ahead and do a horizontal container. Oh, what happened there? Well, our base container is a horizontal container, so we need to change this to a vertical. All right, there we go. Now let's go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. And we're gonna put this above here. And then we're gonna change our settings. We'll again make this 32 maybe. Let's start with 32. I think that'll work for buttons pretty well. And we again wanna get rid of our border. So we'll say none here. And then we'll add a button. And there we go. Now the default on a button size is 32. Let's go ahead and change the button location. You could put it in the center, you could put it on the left or the right. A lot of times I like to put them on the right, so I'm gonna put it over here. We're gonna put a little bit of a buffer over here, or some padding on our right. So we'll put it at say 10. So we're a little bit inside from the curved corner there. And then let's change this to say back. Now you could also use icons for this. So let's go ahead and select this container here and show what I'm talking about. If we say back, we're seeing that we've got the back arrow here as a shape. Now there's a problem with some of these things where you can't actually do on select. Classic icons, you can do an on select all day long, but you've also got other options. So let's go into our classic icon list. Now you've got all these different options. So you could do like arrow left for going back, or maybe there's another icon that you like better for going back. I tend to think this one works pretty good, and you can add an icon right here. So I could add an arrow and say back. I think that looks pretty good. So we're gonna go with that for this design. Now we need to change our on select to tell it what to do. And in this case, we're just gonna make it easy. We're gonna say back, but we're also going to reset our variable. So we're gonna say set GBL select request, and we're gonna say blank. That way, when we go back to the other page, it automatically resets a variable. So there's no kind of an issue with potentially seeing the wrong information. So it's just kind of a way to keep things clean on the design. Now we'll go ahead and test this, hit the back button here, and it works. So we're back at our main page. Now, one design change we're gonna make here, I realized this when we were looking at the other page, I forgot to change the border radius of this container. So we'll change this border radius here. If we come over here to border radius, and we'll go with 20. And let's go ahead and hit the play button so we can see what that looks like. So we are cutting off our title a little bit. So let's adjust things a little. So if we select this container here, we want to have a left of, we'll go with 20 for this one. So it puts it in a little bit. Now, because we did that, we also want to adjust everything down here. So we'll go ahead and move this in 20 also. And then because we made that change, we have to adjust everything else a little bit. Now there is ways to mitigate this a little bit And I'm going to show you that now. So everything's based off of the header, right? So why don't we actually do that? Why don't we actually make everything based off the header? And what we can do is come over here to our X, and what we're going to say is label project request.x. So wherever the X is for our project request field, it's going to move this. And it basically, because this is a container up here, when all of these moved, had we done that for all of these, it would have readjusted everything just based off of the adjustment we made here. So it kind of keeps everything aligned pretty easily when you do that. All right, let's go ahead and save just to make sure that we don't lose anything. All right, let's go ahead and publish. And then we're going to test this out and see how things are looking. So now that we've published, let's go ahead and back out of the app for a second here. And then we'll go to our apps, let it refresh. And there we go. So let's hit play. And now we're only going to see the things that we created, which is exactly what we wanted. And if we go ahead and navigate to this page here, we'll see and be able to view our item. So it's working exactly as we wanted. Looks like we should adjust this a little bit more in. So we should probably fix that quick. But otherwise, everything's looking pretty good. If we hit the back button, again, our design is pretty much seamless in terms of the theme. It's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and copy the URL. And then we're going to go back to our main portal and test things out. All right, so on our main portal, let's go ahead and edit again. And let's go ahead and add another button from a link. Now, one thing we want to adjust here, and this is optional, this is just something I like, I think it looks a little bit better, is we're going to add a little thing at the end here for hide navbar. And we're going to set that equal to true. Now, what this is going to do, if we look at the previous page for a second, it's going to get rid of this area here. Again, I think it just has a better look. There are some benefits. You can come up here and look at the session details, and you can click on your user profile and that kind of stuff. So there are some benefits on why you might want to keep this in there, plus the ability to share very easily. But generally speaking, for the app users, they don't need most of this stuff. So I generally get rid of this so it's more like an actual app interaction. So let's go ahead and hit the add button here. And then we've got our new link right here. And for this one, we'll go ahead and call it EditForm number 2. So we can differentiate between the two and hit republish. So now when we click on this link, it's going to open up our app. And I actually did go through and make an adjustment just to change that back so it's in a little bit further. So that's what that refresh was. But that's how you can show the user all of their requests, what their status is. And you could actually sort this by status if you wanted to also. Or you could add filters, and you can do all kinds of things to make the user experience a little bit better on here. Maybe it's something that they do potentially dozens of requests. So you want to be able to filter down and just look at ones that are in a submitted or, they haven't been processed essentially. So you could add all those filters on here also. We're not going to cover that as part of this video, but that is possible. Now you might be saying, well, couldn't we do something very similar for just creating the request? And you could. You absolutely could. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So back in our app now that we've created, we're going to want to go back to app here, and we're going to want to go to the start screen. And let's go ahead and do that. Now in here, we're going to do something very similar with our with statement. So we're going to open that up. And again, that's parentheses open. And then we're going to add our curly bracket. And we're going to call this start page. And we're going to say it's the lower of param, and we'll call it start. And then we'll go ahead and close out the param, close out the lower, and then we'll put a curly bracket followed by a comma. And then what we want to do is a switch statement. So let's go ahead and add switch. And we want to switch on our start page that we created. So we'll go ahead and add start page, comma, and then we'll enter. And we're going to say intake, basically that new intake is essentially what this is going to be for. We want them to go to the request intake form. Go ahead and do the next one. So hit enter here, and then we'll say main because we're going to take them to the main screen, which has the list of all their options. And that'll be our, again, main page. So we'll say main screen here. And then it's always good to have a fallback. And in this case, I think our fallback probably should just be the main screen. And let's go ahead and close out the switch. And then we'll go ahead and close out the with statement. And that's essentially what we want to have on our start page. So what's happening here? We're essentially creating start page, and we're saying that inside of the URL, whatever the start is equal to, we're going to make a switch statement on. So if the switch is equal, so if the start is equal to intake, it's going to take them to this page. If the start is equal to main, it's going to take them to this page. And if it's something else, we're just going to take them to the main screen. I know this seems really complicated. Hopefully this made sense on how you would set this up. But if it didn't, just do exactly what I just did here. And hopefully everything will work out for you as well. Now let's go ahead, and we have a couple other things we have to do. So that's essentially what we have to put into our start page here. But we also need to make some adjustments to our form. Now, right now we've got this being set based off of what we select on our main screen. We want this to be a new form when it's an intake. So how do we make this a new form when the link defines to create a new form? Well, let's go back to our app here, and we're going to have to go to our on start. And let's make this a little bit bigger again. And then we'll go ahead and set GBL form mode. I'm going to do lower param, and it'll be the start again. And we got to close these. All right, so now we've got our variable that we've created here. And all we're doing is looking at the start again. So if we go back to our on start or our start screen here, start is looking for intake and main. So if it's intake, obviously they're going to the form directly, and if it's main, then they go back to our landing page. So all we're doing is setting it basically this or this. Now, how do we leverage that information in our form? So in our form mode, let's go back here, and our default mode, form mode view, let's go ahead and add an if. We'll say GBL form mode. If GBL form mode equals intake, then we want it to be form mode new. Otherwise, we want it to be form mode view. Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for there. Now, another thing we have to adjust is this back button. We don't want them to be able to see the back button when they're creating a new form. So let's go ahead and copy this. And then we'll go up here and we'll select our visibility. And if it's intake, we want this to be false. Otherwise, we want it to be true. Now, one thing we want to take a look at is, let's go back to our main screen for a second here. And we want to adjust what happens on select here. Now in here, let's go ahead and add something else. We want to set one other variable. We want to just make sure that form mode is always going to be correct when we're coming from the gallery. So we're going to want to set main, because that's what's being set when they click the link. So we're going to set that here also when they click it from the gallery. So that's going to guarantee when they get here, they're going to see this back button. Now, if you're doing an intake, they also need the ability to save or cancel. So we're going to need this button 2 more times. So let's go ahead and copy this twice. All right, let's go ahead and make this one our save. And we probably want to have a save icon for this. Oh, looks like we have to save. All right, now we'll change it. So let's go ahead and save. And then we'll change this one to cancel. And we'll make that the dismiss. So let's find the dismiss. All right, so now we've got a save and a cancel button. What happens when we hit save? So let's change all this out. And we want to submit form. And that'll be our SharePoint form 2. And we'll close that up. And then what we want to do is on success, we're going to change this. We're going to get rid of this request hide and just do a reset of the form. But we're also going to do a notification. So we're going to say notify successfully submitted, and we'll do a notification type of success, and then I typically just show it for about a second or so, so 1000 is 1 second, and there we go. So essentially what's going to happen when we hit the save button is if it's successful, for example, maybe there's incomplete form fields or something like that, so it would not be successful at that point, it's not going to reset or do anything else. It's going to keep it right here. As soon as it's successfully saved, it's going to reset the form, and then it's going to notify successfully submitted, and at that point the user can close out the browser window. Now on cancel, we want to do something kind of the same. So let's just copy this, and on cancel, instead of this back and all this, we're going to say reset the form, successfully canceled, please close the browser. And for this, we have to actually tell it the name of the form because we are outside of the form. So we have SharePoint form 2. All right, so that's going to be what happens on cancel. Now we also just want these buttons to be visible when in the new form. So we're going to basically copy this. Actually, I think it's probably still in there from the copy and paste. And all we're going to do is reverse this. So true and false. And there it goes. And then we're going to do the same thing here. Is just reverse things. True and false. All right. So now what we can do is save and publish our app, and then we'll go test it. All right, so back here, let's go ahead and edit this. So we'll go ahead and add some buttons here. So hit add link, and from a link, and let's go ahead and paste our link in here. Now this has got our parameter for hide nav bar. Now we're not actually using this parameter, but that's essentially what we created with this. And we're gonna hit the add, and again, we have our start. So our start is gonna be equal to intake. And this is gonna be our parameter for getting to a new intake form. So let's go ahead and just copy this so we've got it for the next one. So we'll hit add. Now for this button, we'll say that we want to call this project request intake new option. And we'll hit the add another link here. And again, we'll paste our link in here. And this one's going to be our main. So this is going to be our edit option. So we'll hit add there. And then we'll adjust this and we'll say view existing intakes. All right, so let's republish this and test this out. So if we click this button, we should see the main page with everything that we've submitted. So let's go ahead and click this. And there we go. And if we select, say, vendor management system, we can see the vendor management page. We can see all the different information, and we can hit the back button. And same thing here is we can go back and forth without any problems using this. So let's go back, and now we'll go back to our main page and test out our new intake process. All right, so let's go ahead and do a new intake using our new process. So click here, and just like we expected, we can now create a new project, and we can save and cancel. So I'll go ahead and fill this out. All right, now it's all filled out, so let's hit save and see what happens. Successfully submitted, and it reset so it's ready to do it again. Now you could also say successfully submitted, please close the web browser here. Cancel would have done the exact same thing, it just would have showed that message for canceling up here. Now if I tried to do something like this and I hit save, I'm going to see that an entry is required, and I can continue this form filling out the rest of the fields. So all of the functionality that we were looking for is now working. I know this was a really long video. I hope you found the content helpful. We covered a lot of information in this video. One other kind of side note with this approach is now that we've set parameters and we figured out how to set parameters to show different screens, you could create a page just for showing information. For example, you could create the charts on the page and use a parameter to show that information inside of the portal also. So again, a lot of possibilities. Generally, I recommend just using a Power BI report for that use case, but you could also do it using a setup like this where you can show different pages for different things. That's completely possible. You've just learned how to set up the parameters to do exactly that. And if you want to see more information on how to do that or a specific kind of a content video using this approach, feel free to drop a comment in the video and I'll take a look at maybe creating that video in the future. All right, that's it for today. Hope you found the content helpful. Until next time.